Oh, so blizzard bomb, I think, is what they're calling this. You can see my face a little better. It's a couple of days after the movie, after the review with Big Show. Now we're going to do a proper review. This is the generally nerdy spoiler review of Captain Marvel. And we're gonna jump back in time after you watch this intro, and then we're gonna come back and I'm gonna be inside, not freezing, getting this interesting shot. So let's do that before my fingers fall off.
Generally nerdy.
Oh boy, it's been a long day. This is... Sorry, I'm driving while I'm vlogging. Don't try this at home, kids. We are on the camera mic because I was shooting a video for somebody else earlier today, and I didn't have time to take the microphone off the boom pole. So the mic is in the back seat. We're using camera audio. It sucks. You don't want to be on this for too long. This is the review for Captain Marvel. We'll talk a lot about this. I'm just late. I have to meet up the guys with Big Show Entertainment Network because we're doing before the show deal as well as a proper review afterward. Okay. Oh boy, it's dark. Just parked. Let's fix this. Just parked. I got light. Ah, there we go. Walking in. Light's a little bright. There we go. Yeah, so coming in to see Captain Marvel, doing the pre-show with Big Show Entertainment News, Big Show Entertainment Network rather, and so expectations for the movie are high-ish because if they don't want this to be just people. How's it going?
Thank you.
You're welcome. If they don't want this to just be a movie about a message. Oh, look. See if we can see them. Yay! So we'll continue this conversation in just a second. I'm gonna join Big Show for their pre-show. Anyway, so you got a little bit of a behind the scenes deal. Expectations for this movie are, like I said, a little high-ish. I don't want this to just be a message that happens to also be a movie. I want this to be a movie that happens to have a message. That part I'm fine with, because if it's not a message I agree with, at that point they're not beating me over the head with it. They're just slipping it in the side. Everything that we've seen so far as early reviews, kind of doesn't lend itself to that mentality. So we'll find out. I gotta go put the camera back in the car because I ain't even trying to fight to get this thing in the theater, even though I ain't gonna film it. So we will see you guys in just a few minutes. Okay, just now leaving the theater. Initial reactions are this was a much better movie than initially anticipated. I watched some reviews. I didn't watch any spoiler reviews, so I didn't spoil anything for myself, but I did watch some reviews that kind of painted a pretty different picture than the movie I just watched. I feel like what I was looking for in this movie was there. What I was told was not necessarily there, actually was there. There is a pretty decent character progression. There is a good arc for Carol Danvers. It's not the greatest, and at times it's a little tenuous, but by and large, this was a really good movie. I am going to now cut to me in the future after having processed a little bit more and done a little bit more research. So, back to you, future me, I guess. Oh. Yes. That's right. Everything up until this point has been spoiler-free, aside from the opinion of, do I like the movie? I feel like that's obvious by now. If you're looking for the scores, those shall be on the screen right about here. And everything after here is going to be spoiler-filled. So, real quick, I was going to go over the synopsis, but I feel like the sections of the review will go over enough of what actually happens in the movie. We don't need to go over the actual synopsis. So we're going to break this down slightly differently. I'm still playing with formats and stuff. So review for Captain Marvel, we're going to break it down. Instead of doing just a general overview of things and then going into the individual sections for the review for the scores, we're just going to do the scores and then why it got that score in that section. So, starting things off is the general score. General score is a 72 out of 100. General score, if you'll remember, since it's been a little while since we've done a review, general score is the technical side of things. This is whatever doesn't get caught in the other three technically, but the third one is the enjoyability, which is completely subjective. So the other two are going to be slightly technical. General score, though, is completely technical. And with a Marvel movie, the technicality is never superb. It's very much a cookie cutter style movie when it comes to, camera movements, when it comes to the general methodology of the storytelling. And that's very much by design. Marvel has an aesthetic. Marvel has a direction. Actually, in a lot of ways, the MCU is very much like a TV adaptation in that really the people behind the scenes, specifically Kevin Feige, that is who's directing the ship. In each individual movie, yes, the director has some leeway, but very, very, very little. So, because of that, we get a lot of cookie cutter stuff. Now, when you put those limitations on someone like the Russo brothers, we get something fantastic. We get something special, something very, very unique. Though when we put it in the hands of the directors, where did they go in my notes? Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck, we get something workable. It's not great. It's not bad, though, either, and I feel like that shouldn't go without mentioning. There is nothing on the technical side of this that is absolutely standout horrible. Now, on the writing side of that technicality, there are some issues. We'll get into that in the story/writing section, but general score, as far as execution of everything, it's a C. The biggest issue that I had with this, and in my Big Show Entertainment review, I said it was a nitpick, but the nitpick really stands out. And because the reason I feel like it stands out is because let me rephrase that. It stands out, and I feel like this is why people are saying that it doesn't have a proper progression. There is no story arc for Carol Danvers. And there is. It's just not it's not the traditional hero's tale version of that arc. There's no rejection and acceptance and then so on and so forth. You don't have those traditional points in this arc. They're referenced, they're hinted at even, but they're not the same. What this deals with, instead of changing Carol Danvers' personality, this changes there's a sense of growing up, and it deals mostly with her past and coming to terms with her past and dealing with what she views as weakness. What most people are seeing when it comes to the story arc, the people who are saying that there is no character arc for Danvers, what they're seeing is, at the beginning of the movie, she's a cocksure, snarky member of a military, of an elite cosmic military group. And then at the end, she's a cocksure, snarky member of quasi-member, I guess, of the Avengers. So there's really no change in her personality. And there doesn't need to be for there to be a story arc. The character is richer, not richer like monetarily, but you understand. The character is richer by the end of the movie because she understands where she comes from, she understands her place in the universe, and there's no ridiculous CGI villain that she has to... There is a lot of CGI. That should be addressed briefly. It's great. There are a couple of spots where Agent Coulson really looks like a Barbie doll, though Samuel L. Jackson, Nick Fury, who arguably has the most CGI done to him in this movie, I don't think there was a spot, and I was really, really looking. I don't think there is a single spot where you can pick out Nick Fury's de-aging CGI. So his was very, very well done. Agent Coulson, I can't think of the actor's name right now. I'm blanking. I could pull it up. It's up in my notes, but whatever. There's and it's really only like 3 or 4 spots in a sequence where you go, the CGI kind of slipped right there on his de-aging, but really that's probably the biggest nitpick. And then so we're still I was about to switch sections. We're still in general score. General score again, 72. I feel like this is about what you should expect, kind of middle of the pack as far as technical aspects of this story. And so let's move on next to the mythology. And this is where we find the biggest slip. Now, I might be a little bit more friendly to the movie than a lot of people might appreciate. I know, generally speaking, when it comes to my comic book reviews, I'm more in line with the quote-unquote Comics Gate reviewers, and oftentimes with my movie reviews, I align with them too, with people who are critical of forcing a narrative over story. And social narrative, I think, is probably, I should specify. So, that being said, for the mythology score, we're looking at a 68 out of 100. Again, this is the biggest area where it slips, but it doesn't slip off entirely. There are homages to the source material. The respect that I feel like should have been given in some aspects is given to the source material, and in some aspects is completely forgotten. And in certain aspects, it's the condense for movies reasoning why they had to make these changes, and some of the changes are completely arbitrary and were not needed and could have been executed just as well without the change, if that makes sense. And we'll get to that. So there are 2 primary changes that I feel like make sense as far as inserting into the MCU, because really, if you think about it, and the guys on the Nerd On podcast talk about this a lot, movies are just that version of the story. They're that writer's run. Like in the comic books, you get a different writer's going to do a different story arc. In the movies, it's just a different story arc by a different writer, and the artist is, God, right? Because it's the actors playing. Anyway, so as far as condensing to fit into the MCU, changing the few aspects of how Danvers gets her powers really makes sense. And also involving the Tesseract, the Space Stone, into that process as well also makes sense. And then the other half of that, and all the changes are related to that. And the other half of that, the other change is, instead of it being Captain Marvel, or Marvel, the Kree man, we get Marvel is the one who, after Danvers is near the explosion of the engine of the I'm pretty sure they call it an engine in the comics too. After the explosion that she absorbs the powers of, in the comics, it has nothing to do with the Tesseract, but in the movie it does, and in the comics, Marvel is the one who finds her and aids her back to health, so part of Marvel is fused into Danvers. They pay homage to that, but in the movie, it's Jan Rog, and that makes sense from a storytelling point of view, because then she's got a deeper connection to her villain. The villain issue we'll get to in a minute, but I really did appreciate that, and really those are big changes that really still work in this context. Other changes in this movie, like the gender swap version of Marvel, the Skrulls being a sympathetic race, things like that felt a little forced and unnecessary. I know Feige has been talking about, and this might actually be news to some, at least, originally Marvel wasn't going to be in the story at all, which would have been a horrible mistake, and that movie probably would have gotten a much lower score all around. Then, when they decided, maybe we should include Marvel, they started looking for a male actor to play Marvel. So they were originally intending on going in the direction of the comic books. When they cast Annette Bening, though, to be this Supreme Intelligence, from the way they talk about it, too, it sounds like they were going to make they're going to make Carol Danvers' interpretation of the Supreme Intelligence be the real iteration, the way it actually is supposed to look. That kind of seems to be the subtext when they talk about it like this. But with Annette Bening, and the fact that they couldn't find a proper male actor to play Marvel, it seems like they then just went, hey, gender swap, because narrative. This easily could have been Phyla Vel, the daughter of Marvel, who also had the title of Captain Marvel, because that is a title in the comic books, so they could have paid more homage to their source material by saying Phyla Vel. Really, all that is a change in dialogue. Yes, the motivations of Marvel, who in my scenario is then Phyla, the motivations would be slightly associated, because it's Marvel that was doing the things that was getting him on the bad side of the Kree in the comic books, whereas Phyla was fighting against the Kree because of what they had already done to her father. So, I mean, really, that's fixed in like 4 lines of dialogue, and then there's no issue. So that really felt unnecessary and social narrative driven, and not as a means to enhance the story. And then there was one change that I felt like can go either way, and it depends on how they treat it in future movies. And I'm talking about Monica Rambeau, who, for those that don't know, is the actual second version, or the second person to carry the title of Captain Marvel. Monica Rambeau is an Earthling and is a black woman, and so in this movie, potentially Monica is still going to be the second person to hold the title. She does exist, she's just a kid in this movie. So theoretically, they could pass the torch off later to the kid once Brie Larson's contract is up, or whatever reason they come up with, and they find an age appropriate. I mean, Endgame is like 25 years after the events of Captain Marvel, so really Monica Rambeau could be it could be a superpowered being in this universe as it is. Her abilities to change energies, I believe. And anyway, so when you find out her mom's last name, and then you find out her name is Monica, and you're like, oh, that's a really cool little Easter egg. If it remains just an Easter egg, then it was handled improperly. If she becomes the next Captain Marvel, then I feel like that is, or even if she becomes Photon, I believe is what they call her after she gives up the title of Captain Marvel, and she goes by a couple other names, but Photon is the name she takes immediately after Marvel. So if she's already an existing being, if she's already a superhero in this universe, and we see her in the next Captain Marvel movie, perhaps somewhere along those lines, then I feel like that's a decent way to have dealt with it. I feel like it's really weird that they didn't make this movie based on the character of Monica Rambeau if they're going to be so concerned with the social narrative and all of the issues of inclusion and diversity and Me Too and blah blah blah. That makes more sense to appease the narrative checklist, doesn't it? And also, potentially, that's a cooler movie than what we got. So, inconsistent, I feel like, is the way to go with the mythology score, and that is why it got a 68. But next, we're moving over to the story and the writing score, and the last two sections, because the biggest issues were technical and mythology, those were the biggest issues, the longest discussion points. So, the last two, story and enjoyability, are going to go pretty quick, so if you stuck around this long, you only got a couple minutes left. Anyway, sorry. Story and writing-wise, it's cohesive. So story writing score is a 78 out of 100. I almost wanted to give this a B. Almost. There's just too much. It's too heavy-handed, and that I feel like could have been eased. Not only in the direction, which we've already talked about, not only in the direction, but also in the writing room. There is at least 3 screenwriters attached to this. 2 of them are also the directors of the film. So as many and then Feige always has a say in what's going on, so he could have fixed some of these things. Really, it comes down to, I forget the technical term. There's a word for when you have a serious moment and it is subverted by a joke in a negative way. Marvel does this a lot. It starts with an H. I really wish I could remember that word. Marvel does this a lot, and there are certain points where it works. There's definitely a lot more in this movie where it just ruins the mood. And there's definitely multiple points in this movie where I found myself saying, I get it. We're in the 90s. You don't have to beat me over the head with it. There was a definite lack of subtlety. I think that's kind of what it boils down to. Though aside from the lack of subtlety and the mythology issues, which we addressed ad nauseum, the story is still pretty cohesive and it flows pretty well. There are few. I know there are at least 1 or 2 plot holes that, as far as the greater MCU, but if you look at it as a thing unto itself, then it's cohesive. You can follow it easily. There's plenty of subplot. There's plenty of things going on to keep you entertained throughout the entire runtime of this movie. And then our last bit is the enjoyability score. Without getting too far into this one, we're going 80 out of 100, so a B for enjoyability. I honestly cannot recommend this movie too much. I feel like this is definitely another strong entry. I wouldn't say it's better than Black Panther, but it's close. They're probably on par with one another. Granted, I wasn't the hugest fan of Black Panther to begin with. There's a lot of hype behind that movie that makes people think it's better than it actually is. That's not to say that it's bad by any stretch. It's just not as good. It's not Infinity War. Wow, I almost said Endgame. It's not Infinity War at all. So it's totally It's totally enjoyable. I listened to a review that was talking about the bland color palette, and yeah, there are sections of this movie that are kind of bland, but it's called for in those sections. This is honestly a pretty colorful movie. There's no annoying blue filter, except for, again, in certain sections where it makes sense to be on the lens. There's actually one part early in the movie where they land on that planet where they're trying to extract their informant, I believe, who has been replaced with a Skrull, where after they land, they kind of pop up out of water, just their heads, and you see their glowing eyes and their glowing mouth guards. And I turned over to Super Dave from The Big Show. I turned over to him and was like, wow, that looks fantastic, because it's a really cool look. This by no means is a bland movie by and large. I mean, I wish I was a better editor so I could put like great examples up here and I knew how to get footage without getting a content strike on the channel, because Disney will do that. But so just go see it. This is definitely one that makes sense to catch while it's in its early run in the theaters. If you can't, for whatever reason, then definitely try and catch it at the discount theater if you have one of those near you. Total score 298 out of 400. I'm saying it right now. This is a good movie. Definitely go see it. Thank you guys for watching. This has been a review with Generally Nerdy. Do you agree with the points that I made? Let me know in the comments down low. There's a website, generallynerdy.net. There's also a Patreon, patreon.com/generallynerdy. You can click the boxes to the left of my face if you need to catch up on anything on your nerdy list. And before we go, guys, always remember that if it's generally nerdy, it's probably here.